Welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I am your host, Fernandito Osa. Today we'll be talking about the K-9 unit, and today my guest to tell us more about that is the Lieutenant Colonel Cory Lewis. He is the supervisor for the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department K-9 unit. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
It's nice to have you.
Pleasure.
So we want to learn a little bit, hear a little bit more about the department, and how long have you been with the department now?
22 years and counting.
22 years on the counter. You remember when you walked in?
Oh, absolutely. Day one, I remember. Scared to death, nervous, working in a correctional environment. Absolutely.
How long do you think it takes a little bit before you start feeling a little more comfortable in that role? Because obviously, like you said, you come in scared, you're starting, and
You're just nervous because the environment, the stereotypes of working in a correctional facility. But I'd say probably after 6 months of doing the job day in and day out, you start to look at it more as a job instead of a prison environment.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So talk to us a little bit about your position that you hold here.
As a canine supervisor?
Please.
So I've been the canine supervisor for about 12 years now. And sometimes when I tell people that, they're like, wow, that's a long time. Well, the reason for that is, when you come into canine, you work the life of the dog. So the dogs usually come into the unit at about 1.5 to 2 years old, and then you'll work them up until 10 years old when they typically retire. So it's been fascinating. I absolutely love it. Best experience in my life thus far.
And at that age, for a dog, where are they in the state of mind as far as like alertness, what's the command starting? Yeah, because...
So you got to go to the academy. What happens is we go to the Boston Police Canine Academy for our canines. Boston selects the dogs. They usually select them about 1.5 to 2 years old. And the reason they wait until that age is because the dog needs to develop a little bit of maturity as far as, like, depending on the type of dog, if you have a patrol dog or a narcotics detection dog or dual purpose for that matter, which I'm sure we'll get into later in the conversation. But they wait until they reach a certain level of maturity, and then they test them for their play drive and their ability to kind of do police work or law enforcement type of activities.
So they kind of get really an opportunity to pick and choose.
Yes, it's a selective process. I mean, more dogs, what we call, wash out of the academies as opposed to graduating. I mean, the typical academy for a police canine is about 14 weeks, and dogs have washed out of the academy as far as 10 to 13 weeks in because they're just not meeting the standard when it comes to certain types of activities that they need to perform.
So tell me a little bit more about what is it you do exactly with the canine?
What we do with the dogs in general. So I'll talk about my daily responsibilities as a canine handler. Basically what we do is our primary responsibility is to protect the perimeter of the facility. So we patrol the perimeter of the facility, and basically our job is to make sure that no one is trying to introduce any type of narcotics or contraband into the facility. Our facility runs right along the Mass Ave connector with 93. If somebody really wanted to, they could probably try and throw something over the wall. So we patrol that area to kind of make sure that nobody's trying to introduce any type of contraband. We do have convicted members of the population that are involved in gang activities. So some of their associates and affiliates will come up to the facility and they'll try to communicate with them to pass on messages. So part of our patrols is just to kind of like police that area, kind of like keep people moving along, prevent them from trying to communicate with each other, do things like that. We also conduct narcotic searches inside of the facility. Every now and then, certain small aspects of the inmate population are able to smuggle things in. They're very resourceful with the ways that they do that. So the way we combat that is we train our dogs for narcotics detection. We go into the various units on pretty much a daily basis and search random cells and just try to detect things and prevent them from being introduced.
Talk to me a little bit about your additional role as a supervisor.
So, as a canine supervisor, my primary responsibility is to make sure that the unit is in compliance with Mass General laws as far as having a canine unit is concerned. Each handler is required to attend 24 training days a year, which is 2 days a month. So that's the minimum standard. We also have to make sure that their medical records are up to date, rabies vaccinations, things like that. So it's my job to make sure that we stay in compliance with that. Also making sure that handlers are following proper procedure. Department policy as far as entering the facility, checking with the appropriate supervisors. Canines can't be brought into the facility unless the shift commander gives authorization. So they have to follow all those different types of protocols before they can enter and then document it appropriately. One of the things that I like to do as a supervisor is I kind of put people to task. I have some excellent people working for me. I've been blessed with a great team. I have Corporal Tim Freight's on day shift. He's a meticulous record keeper. So as a supervisor, I recognize that. Like, you know what, Tim? Make sure that all of these records are filed appropriately and everything's up to snuff so that when we get audited, and we usually get audited about once a year, it's easy for me to come in and track these things. So I put him to task with that, and he's fantastic at it, so he does a very good job with that. 3 to 11, I have Corporal Conley, who is excellent at researching. So he'll research different policies and different agencies and see how they deploy their canines and different equipment that they have. Some of his things are a little off the wall. Sometimes he wants a shotgun rack and things like that. I'm like, I don't think we're quite there yet, Bobby. But like I said, I've got a great team. By no means does the unit run like a top solely because of me. It's a unit. We work together, and we lean on each other. Everybody basically works independently, so you have to be able to, do the tasks that are set forth and do the job correctly.
Mm-hmm. Do you sense or have you noticed changes from day one when you began 5 to 10 years, how things have changed in the process, or has it always been the same?
No, oh God, the department has changed tremendously.
Yeah.
It's night and day. It runs like a top now. There's the state-of-the-art camera system, which has been fantastic. It's helped a lot with report writing and major incidents that we have. We can actually review it after something happens and critique it and determine better ways of responding to things.
And how hard is the certification process for the dogs?
Each of the dogs have to attend a narcotic certification annually. United States Police Canine Association is the agency that runs the police certifications. It's typically for narcotics. So what that's set up to do is to challenge the dog and to challenge the handler. So but basically to put it in the simplest terms is we go to usually a school on a weekend or something like that, and the trainers will go in and hide narcotics in areas where the dog can not only sense it, smell it, and indicate on it, but the handler has to get involved because it's not just going to be under a chair or in a desk. It's going to be maybe up on a light fixture or behind a clock that could be 6 feet up the wall. So you have to recognize the dog's behavior when you're in that area and determine that it's higher than the average search. So it challenges both the dog and the handler. So that way, that's how you're certified. Basically, when you go to the academies, before you graduate an academy, a typical narcotics academy, about 5 weeks. So before you graduate that academy, you have to pass a certification, which is even tougher than the USPA standards, and that's set forth by Boston Police. So, but the typical USPA standard would be you search 5 vehicles, outside, exterior hides only. So they would put a narcotic hide outside the vehicle, and then you'd go into a building, i.e. a school, hotel, whatever's available, and you'd search 3 rooms. It'll be 2 hides in one of the 3 rooms. So that's how you would certify for USPCA. For Boston, it's 5 vehicles, both inside and outside searches, so you have to put the dog in the car to search as well. You get 5 rooms, 3 hides, so you get 2 more rooms to search and determine it's equally as challenging, actually more challenging. But it puts you to task, and when you graduate that, you're more than ready to do the job.
And I'm curious now because of all the detail you're saying. So it sounds like almost like these dogs, even though they're specifically trained for the department, they sound like they could work just about anywhere. Like,
well, yeah, and that's
airports and
yeah. Well, that's
you know what I mean?
That's the philosophy behind it. Because we attend the Boston Police Canine Academies for narcotics and patrol, we're going with, as a sheriff's department, we're going with other police departments as well. So you have that commonality of training, so that if we're needed outside the facility, I mean, corrections and police, they're both law enforcement, but corrections is more corrections-based, where people are dealing with a convicted, confined population, whereas police are dealing with the community. But because we attend the same academies and the same training and the same certifications, we can be called out on a mutual aid basis to assist Boston Police, local municipalities within Suffolk County with searches of vehicles, residences, you name it. Even tracking lost children, bad guys, things like that. Like, our dogs are capable of doing all those things because we go to the same academies. So
now I'm
very
curious,
involved.
like how they eat, what do they eat? You know, because these dogs are really well fine groomed, taken care of.
It's funny that you say that. One thing that I think the general public would notice when you see a police canine, be it a Labrador or a Shepherd or a Belgian Malinois, is they tend to be very lean and very fine. And the reason for that is because they have to be agile. They have to be able to get up into areas, small confined areas, to search for things. We also don't feed the Shepherds until the end of their shift, and you typically eat once a day. And that's because if a Shepherd has to be activated, where he has to apprehend somebody and actually track and search for somebody, it just takes a lot out of them. So if they get a full belly of food, their stomachs can actually flip, and it can actually kill them. So they don't eat until the end of their shift, and that's once a day. And the leaner they are, the better. They're like track athletes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, now that you describe it that way, it's true. They are so fine and lean. And that was going to be my next question on the breed of the canine and why they're best for that particular job. But you described it. Yeah. So they are the best breeds. What are the qualities that makes a good canine? You mentioned some.
Yeah. What the trainers do is and I refer to the trainers because we're handlers, we're not trainers. The trainers do is they look for what's called their drive. For a patrol dog, it would be its fight drive, its ability to come forward when it's being challenged as opposed to backing itself into a corner. They're alpha dogs, which are pack leaders. So they look for dogs that have that capability. So they have to have a strong fight drive and an equally strong play drive. The play drive would be wanting to look for a towel or a ball or a toy, which is typically the reward for finding narcotics. So they'll look more for the play drive in both dogs, but primarily the play drive, it really comes into play with the Labradors, because they tend to be a single-purpose kind of a canine where they're only going to look for narcotics. Whereas the fight drive is more important than the Shepherds and the Malinois because their job is going to be much more detailed as far as, tracking bad guys and having to fight to protect its handler.
Are there, for the folks that might not know the description of dogs, you get 3 different types of dogs you mentioned. Are they're all different in sizes? Or are they basically all the same size?
No,
there's
there's all different sizes. I've seen police dogs as much as 100 pounds and very tall, and they stand on their hind legs. They're almost 6 feet tall. So it just depends on the parents of the dogs. I think most handlers prefer to have a smaller, more petite dog because they're more agile. You're going to have a lot less shoulder injuries with dogs like that because you figure they're powerful animals. That's why they'll have a prong collar or something on them to kind of slow down that pull drive and kind of keep them under control.
What is it like for the officers to train these canines?
Oh, it's fantastic. Like I said, I'll give you an example. So one of the things that I thought was the most fascinating thing as far as attending an academy for the canines is when you do the tracking portion of it. Everything starts with obedience. You have to have obedience before you can move forward. But the tracking portion of it, that's something that all dogs do. So if you think about this, you've had dogs before, we were talking earlier.
Yes.
So when dogs come out of your house and you're going for a walk, what do? They sniff everything and they pee on everything.
Yes.
So basically what they're doing is they're tracking odor, they're tracking other dogs in theirs and then marking those areas to communicate with the other dogs that they were there. This is my area now. If it's a female, then the male's communicating with the female's communicating with the male. This is where I've been, I'll be around here again. It's funny, it's their version of texting, I guess.
Another way of texting.
Yeah, but so the most fascinating thing is teaching them, so they already do it naturally, is what they do is they track. So teaching them to track when you want them to and teaching them to track a specific odor. That's the most fascinating part of the training. So and then you have to learn how to read them when they are tracking. So let's say, for instance, we have for sake of an example, we'll use a lost child. So a lost child is playing in a playground and he wanders off into the woods, and mom and dad don't know where he is. So they call police department, sheriff's department, whoever shows up with a tracking canine, and they'll start a track. So you have all these different children's odors there. So how do you know the dog's tracking the correct odor?
Right.
The truth is you don't. So what you try to do is hopefully they have a car seat, a T-shirt, anything that the child has had that hasn't been washed recently, it's going to have that child's odor on it. Where was the last area the child was seen? Well, he was over by the swing set. Okay, take this T-shirt and put it on the ground over there. So then you bring the dog over, you put his tracking harness on and his long line. They have like a 30-foot line. And I can go into more detail with that if you want me to.
Yeah, please.
So they have a 30-foot line, and then you'll bring him over and you'll put him in a down. And he already knows what's going on because there's a harness on. So the harness is so that he can extend his neck. So rather than it being connected to a leash and confining how far his neck and nose can extend, the leash and the pressure is coming from the middle of his back. So now he can push out and pull, and through training he knows, oh, okay, it's time to go find a bad guy. He doesn't know he's looking for a child. So you put that T-shirt down, you have him check, and then you give him his command, which would typically be in German. We use German commands. And he would sniff that, and then you'd cast him out. And you let him go out about 20 feet on that leash, and he's looking for an odor similar to the one that he just sniffed, because that's what we've created as a scent pad, where the start of the track would be. So he finds that odor, he's looking around, and it could take 15 minutes. It doesn't happen right away. And you just kind of let him drift out, and you just kind of narrow areas out and weed areas out as far as where he searched until he picks up something, and you'll know he picked it up because poof, it's off to the races. So they go, whoa, there it is, and it's gone. So it's fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah. So another thing that you have to take into consideration is he's looking for a bad guy. He doesn't know it's a child. So as that track narrows down and he starts to pull a little harder, you want to start calling out to that child and let him know that you're coming close because they're scared, they're hunkered down. God forbid, hopefully you find him. But if you can get to him before the dog does, great. But there's also things that can happen if the dog gets to the child before you know it. Sometimes they'll blow right by him. Say the wind is to the child's back and the odor's drifting off this way. Dog will blow right by the child and go, wait a minute. Whoa, what's that? He could come back and potentially bite him because he's looking for a bad guy. Exactly. So it's important for the handlers to read that behavior and kind of work up the line and call out. Hopefully you can prevent anything like that from happening.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah,
That's
fantastic.
It is amazing. Talk a little bit about some of the work that you do around the Suffolk County.
So in Suffolk County in general, I think I mentioned before, we do mutual aid calls. Boston Police and State Police are the two biggest unions in Suffolk County, so they have a lot of dogs. So our mutual aid calls have gone down considerably, but every now and then they're tied up and we'll get a call to help out with a search for a lost child, barricaded suspect, somebody in a house that broke into a house or broke into a business. So we attend all that same academy, so we do all that same stuff. We also do canine demonstrations in the community, which I love to do because it's an opportunity to kind of like talk about what the dog does and explain to people why the dogs are the way they are, why they act the way they do, etc.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And obviously, I'm sure fire and all that kind of stuff. They don't sniff out with fires or
certain dogs. Yeah,
folks.
you have.
There's certain dogs on that.
That would be
area, right?
what's called an EOD dog, an explosive ordnance dog, and they're trained to look for gunpowder and gasolines and things like that. So that dog would have just that specific responsibility.
So,
excuse me.
My next question would have to be to talk a little bit about what your dog is like. Your dog.
Yeah, my dog in particular, I affectionately refer to him as Angry.
Angry.
And it's just that they all have their own dispositions. Some dogs are very sociable. Some dogs aren't sociable at all. My dog is not sociable. He is what you would consider a one-handler dog. He's sensitive to me and me only, and everyone else he considers to be a threat. He is around my family. I take him home. He's fine with my family, but he's a working dog. He's not a pet. So when he's at home, he tends to be confined to his kennel unless I'm on vacation and I'm walking him, something like that. And I will take my kids along with me when I'm walking him, so he knows that, okay, this is part of the family pack. He sees them in the yard all the time. He knows who they are, but they're not petting him and scratching his head.
Right.
It's never. That's
chase
never,
the ball.
Yeah, they're not throwing a ball for him. They're just with me when I'm with him, and he knows he's not working. I'm not in uniform. He doesn't have all this equipment on, so I socialize him that way. But he's a single handler dog. But I absolutely love him. I love that he's angry. I say that he's angry, but he just loves to work. So what he wants to do is he wants to go to a track. He wants to go find somebody constantly.
Yeah.
So that's why I refer to him as angry. He's always barking and shaking the cruiser, but he just wants to work.
And I was telling you that earlier, right?
Yeah.
Is that every time I go by a car and they just like somebody's gonna rip the car apart and come out of it like whole dog.
Exactly.
Like, whoa,
exactly,
buddy,
yeah. But it's not, and we can talk more about that. But that's one of the things I like to bring forth in canine demonstrations, because I've had people say to me, "Oh, vicious dog," and they're walking by, "Vicious dog," and I'm like, "No, it's not a vicious dog." But because I'm working right now, I don't have the opportunity to explain that to you. But he's just alerting. He's letting me know that somebody's near, and that's why they do that.
And when does a dog retire?
Typically at 10 years old. You can work them till 10, but it depends on the dog. I mean, some of them at 10 years old are they act like they're 2. They're raring to go, and you can continue working them. But I would like to retire dogs at the age of 10, because then they have time to just be a dog. Unfortunately, the sad thing is, because these dogs are so stressed out, because they're always working and always looking for a fight and always looking for a confrontation, because that's the way they're trained, it's like being like that all the time. So when you're like that all the time, it's a lot of stress. So when they retire and they're no longer working all the time, it's like, I have no purpose. All of a sudden they get sick and they don't live much longer after their retirement.
So they're almost here for a special purpose.
Yeah, they only know one life. They don't know that life in the house where they're watching TV with you and being
on a sofa,
fed hot dogs
over.
and things like that from the table. They don't get that life. They work they need to work. So they don't live long after retirement. It's pretty sad.
And since we have a few more minutes to wrap up, I just wanted to ask you my last question. Any other thoughts on misconceptions about canines you'd like to clear up for the people?
Yeah, I mean, I want people to know that these dogs are serving a purpose. Their purpose is not only to protect the handler, but to protect the general public. Like we were just talking about, you walk by a vehicle and it's shaking and that dog's barking, and they're not vicious animals, they're trained. And what he's doing is he's alerting. Whether I'm in the car or not, he's trained to alert when people come close. So what they're doing is they're alerting to let the handlers know that somebody's around. Everyone is a threat other than the handler. That's the way they're trained. These aren't pets, they're police dogs. So I try to get people to understand that. And even if they were to get out of the car, 9 times out of 10, legitimately, and God forbid that ever happened, but 9 times out of 10, all they're going to do is come up and sniff you and keep moving. The reason accidental bites happen, and it can never happen, there's like zero margin of error in canine law enforcement work, because that's just not okay. But 9 times out of 10, they're just going to sniff you and run away. People get bit because when they see that dog come out that's been shaking the car, they're scared. So what do? They either run, like, they're freaking out, and the dog's trained to react to that.
Yeah, of course.
So that's why it happens. But if you could just stand still, if you could possibly do it, he would just sniff you and run away.
Wow. Yeah. Lieutenant Colonel Cory Lewis, Supervisor of Suffolk County Sheriff's Department K-9 Unit. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for our segment. Stay tuned, and thank you for tuning in.
Queen is just my everything.
His smile did it. His smile, his eyes, his knowledge. My landlord, he decided that he wanted me to move based on the fact that I was transgender. Let's just respect people in everyday life for just being human.
Welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I am your host, Fernandito Osa. Today we're going to be talking about workforce development. And to tell us a little bit about that is the manager of the workforce development, Val Harris. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here.
That's a pleasure.
So let's begin by, let me ask you the first is, how did you come to the department?
Well, I was hired by Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation to run a reentry program for them because they saw the need to have men help that were coming back to the community, living in the properties that they own. So they hired me, and the main thing was that the men that they were looking at were on probation, and they needed some kind of guidance. And so I had to go inside the jail in order to start working with these men because they wanted the connection to start in the jail. So when they were released, they had someone to come to be able to help them find jobs and dress for success and get the high sets. So they are, that's how I started coming into jail. But it's funny because probably 10 years before that, I was doing prison ministry with the church that I was in at the time. And so I was really, comfortable and familiar with some of the people in there. And so as I started working, before long, I became a Boston Reentry Initiative case manager. And I was hired by the jail, by the Boston Police, and by Dorchester Bay, actually, because all three people interviewed me. And one day I was walking through the jail a couple of years ago, and Chief Harris, Mike Harris, said, I need to see you. And I said, okay. And he offered me this job as workforce development manager because they said, they noticed that I was caring, and the men kind of like gravitated toward me when I spoke with them. And so here I am, as the workforce development manager.
And it's funny how you put it, because in reality, working for Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation in the community, serving the population, was the population that then you come to then work for the Suffolk County, which is the population you were serving. And so kind of then now you're taking care of the men or women, if any, but men that are there, and now they're also going out for services, but also utilizing some services now through Dorchester Bay as well.
Exactly.
That's
and
awesome.
A lot of the men don't have resumes, so the Linda Mello, who worked for me and still there, I send them to her, and she also does some job placement. So it's a good way to keep them in the loop. And a lot of the men are from the community. It's Cape Verdean community, and so most of my clients were Cape Verdean and African American. So it's good.
Good. And my next question was going to be to ask you a little bit about other positions you had or have had in the Suffolk County. And you mentioned the BRI.
Boston Reentry Initiative.
So tell me a little bit about Boston.
The Boston Reentry Initiative was a grant-funded program run through the Boston Police Department. They got the grant, federal grant. And what they did was they vetted young men from 16 to, actually 18 to 24 that were problems. They knew that they were highly likely to reoffend. And so they put a group of us together, and I think there was like 8 of us, and we case managed different parts of the city. And so what we did was we worked with the men inside and make sure that they got the services that they needed so that they could be trained on release, so they could find jobs and schooling, and we have a place where we could send them for clothing. And so in the program inside the jail, we did a program called Dress for Success. And it was a 2-week program, which we tried to elongate, but it never took hold. And what we did was we trained them. We talked to them about our own life experiences. We talked to them about financial planning, understanding your Cory, how to tie a tie, how to speak, mock interviewing. And it was just a real pleasure to see some of the men that really wanted because, I mean, through attrition, some of them ended up not finishing, for certain reasons. But it was real good, and men really enjoyed it. And they always said to us, can we, why don't you do this longer so that we can have more time with you? Because once you get that, let me say this, Fernando. The men don't care if we have PhDs or if we have a lot of money or if we have a nice car and a nice home. All they want to know is that we care. And you know yourself, once you get that kind of relationship with somebody, then the trust comes, because they don't trust.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I like the way you put that together, because with the workforce development, with the BRI, with the Dorchester Bay, all in one in how it really involves. These are services that are provided for the men that are there, and these are services that sometimes these men don't know that they have.
Exactly.
Because they don't know what they're looking, but they want to do something.
Exactly.
And they don't know where to go, and then that's where you come in and you are able to kind of explain to them, walk them through the process. Tell me a little bit about some example. You don't have to use names, but what is it like when you sit with someone and you engage them with them, and you're trying to find out what is it they want to do, and they don't really know, but you can kind of direct them the right way. And what is that conversation like, and the excitement and the energy behind that person?
Everybody has a dream. When we were 7, 8, 9 years old, there was something that we wanted to be. And there's a reason for that. We all get different gifts and talents. And through trials and tribulations, we don't get to fulfill our dreams. And so now we don't think that there's anything possible for us to do, because we're incarcerated, we have a Cory, and so nobody loves me and all that. And so I have had a lot of success with men. It's funny. I just got a call from one of the guys that I helped get clean and sober when I was directing the Salvation Army shelter in Cambridge. And you know why he called me?
Why?
And this guy hasn't called me in a while. He's called me because one of the guys that I used to have drive the van died. And he wanted me to know that this guy died. And so I told him, just let me, because they know I'll come to the funeral. I'll do whatever I can to support. And so that's the kind of relationship. And let me explain something to you. It's been 20 years since I directed that shelter. So the relationship.
And don't forget, huh?
Okay? I was like, I look at my phone and I say, okay, something's wrong. And, because for him to call me, there was always something wrong. But he called me to give me a heads up.
That's
so those kind of relationships can last forever,
Yeah.
What the men think is that we come into jail, we do our job, and we leave, and we don't care about them. But through my experiences, I've found that, I mean, a man called me yesterday, and he called, he's in a halfway house. He calls me Dad. He said, Dad, I got a problem, and that's, that's a plus for me, because I know that I've made an impact in this man's life, and he's not a kid.
Yeah.
He's a grown man.
Yeah.
Past 40.
I've watched you talk to the man, and I watch you as we sometimes do, or you normally do your groups, but you're very transparent. They identify with you right from the cuff. There's nothing in between of nitfitch. It's just straight up from the cuff. And but it's funny you said about the dad piece, because not only the men, but sometimes your own, members
peers,
of staff.
yes.
And I'm sitting in my office and I hear, one of the ADS says, Dad, and I'm thinking, I'm going to get a chance to meet his father. And I walk out of my office, like, where's your father? And he walks into your office. I'm like,
yes.
You're his, but it's the relationship.
It's a relationship.
It's that relationship.
Yeah. It's
the bond that you have with these folks and the staff, because loving, caring, and passionate.
Nick, that Nick came into my office one day and he says, Val, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. He said, can I call you Dad? I said, yeah, no problem. And I mean, it's not just on the job. These men call me on the weekend and they know that I'm going through something right now with my family, and they say, you better call me, whatever you need. those types of things don't just happen by coincidence. It speaks volumes to the what you see is what you get. I'm not going to be this way to you and then turn around and talk about you.
Right.
You know, I'm just, this is all I can do.
Right.
And you know, our word is our bond. And
right.
you know the success you have with the men in there because they know that you're sincere.
Right, right.
You know?
Why are jobs so important for these men?
Jobs?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the problem with jobs is that the trainings that we have inside the jail that prepare them, now we go from an OSHA 10 to an OSHA 30. We have the gardening, we have the sewing, we have CGI, we have all these things that
And
we do.
let me take you back because you mentioned those are great programs, and I want to. OSHA is for what?
OSHA's for construction.
Construction. And you got the gardening.
Yeah, gardening.
And
for
then you have
landscaping.
But then you mentioned another
And
one.
there's small engine repair and there's auto repair. So a guy can walk out of there and give you an oil change, change a tire, fix a flat, put an alternator together. You know, especially operate the lifts because that's you know not an easy thing to do. And so in the small engine repair, you can repair lawnmowers and different type of small engine
machinery.
You know, so we have these things. Getting a man a job isn't a big thing because there's jobs that they can, you know, dishwasher and busser and waiter, but we want to give them a career.
Right.
You know, you may have to start off doing, you know, flipping burgers. You might have to do that. But if you're sincere about what you're doing, then it's going to change. Right. You know, and education is the way to go.
Right. There are two pieces I want to add to that. But one of them is with the CWP, they get a chance to be hands-on some work, some type of work.
CGI is hands-on.
Hands-on.
CWP is going out of the building and okay, it is actually hands-on because like what happens is if Heather gets a business that wants paint, you know, painting,
or something, yeah.
They take the guys and you know you see the details around the
because remember, some of these guys never get out of the bed to do anything. So hands-on for them is like, wait a minute, you're gonna get me up at what 15 below zero and go out there and shovel?
They go out and they shovel.
You know what I mean? That was the first question. And the other second question I have with you, you actually do have, you don't have to use a name, but you had a success gentleman who went out, who left a while back and got into the programs and resources that you, and he's now come back and talked about it. And he's, I believe, in the union.
We have a young man that every time he saw one of us, regardless of who was his case manager when I worked for the BRI, would always say, listen, I need to see so-and-so. Can you help me with this? He said he was going to come see me. And we laughed because he was, he'd leave and say, I'm gonna contact you. And then he'd come back and say, I'm gonna contact you when I leave. And he finally contacted us. We put him in a program. He got an apprenticeship. We saw that there was a difference in him. We asked him to come back and speak to the panel, which you know we do every fourth Wednesday of the month. And that Wednesday, he had just signed his contract to be a union laborer starting with $36 an hour. And he comes back. And we have more than one. We have a gentleman that is working for MIT, traveling the country doing things.
Yes, I've met him.
And he's come to the panel to let the men know that you can't change. And he had a gun charge, you know. So my thing is to let these men know, no matter what you've done, if you put your best foot forward and you partner with us, we will get you where you need to be in life. And then we can take hands off and you can do it on your own. But we all need help.
Val, talk to me a little bit about the difficulties of speaking to employers about our clients.
Well, you know, there's a stigma. Of, you know, they've got a Cory and we're not going to hire them. But the bad part about it is they hire them, and then the Cory comes back, and then they have to make a decision. Because it's not like they're not good people. It's just they made a mistake. They took a choice. They took a path that wasn't in their favor. And then when they found out, they had a Cory. But the employers have softened up, many of them.
Yes.
You know, of course they get a stipend for hiring.
Right.
if they choose to. But yeah, they've softened up. But sometimes it's just, an uphill battle. I mean, I had 25 men and women go to a place where a man that owned a construction company was going to hire them. He brought in the films. He showed them what he expected and everything, and then he, for some reasons, changed his mind. Never contacted us. Never said, sorry, I can't do it. And the guys are looking at me like, and women, because we had men and women go to these trainings, and so that's the downfall sometimes, but we can't give up.
On that note, are there any specific skills that the employers are looking for when you're talking to these employers, or it just can be varied?
Based on, it's not the skills that the employers are looking for, it's the skills that we're trying to get them so that we can place them with the right skills with the employers, Because, I mean, if you're going to go to one of these, fast food chains, you don't need any experience. If you're going to be a dishwasher or a busser, you don't need any experience. But the problem is, I had a guy, I was teaching a CGI class, and a man said to me, if I don't get a good job when I get out of here, I'm going to go back to selling drugs. And I said, well, thanks for sharing. I said, well, let me pose this question to you. If I had a $40,000 a year to start a job right now, would you qualify? So we have to get them qualified. And then the employer has no excuse on, well, they have a Cory, yeah, but, we think that they can do the job.
Talk a little bit about the rise and the mock jobs for men.
Well, we did a mock interview 2 years ago. We partnered with Project Place, and we had the different men and women come in, and we had the inmates come down, and they sat with them, and they interviewed them. And the hope was that once they get out, they would have someone they could go, because they were people that had businesses, so they could get a job with them. And that kind of worked for a minute, but it wasn't, get people to come into jail on a regular basis and do that, you really have to put a lot of things together. And we haven't done it since. But it worked. It was very well welcomed.
You don't have to give many names, but we've talked about some of the success stories. Do you find the men that are in there, are there specific areas in age factors? I mean, is there more preference in the younger, the older? Does it matter?
What happens is we basically have to work with the younger ones. I mean, it's like in my church, we work with the younger ones because we want to put them on a path of righteousness. But the men in the jail, the young ones are the ones that really need to train. The older guys kind of resist, but I found a way to get through to them. And they resist because they're envious of the fact that we really pay more attention to the younger men. And so, that's basically when I was a case manager, like I said, 18 to 24, 26 is the age of the gangs. And so that's where we concentrated most of our efforts.
With a little bit of time that we have left, is there anything else you'd like to add that I might have missed?
Well, people don't understand that the people that are incarcerated are human beings. They've made mistakes. I have 3 men right now. I created a program called Spiritual Recovery when I worked for the Salvation Army. I would go back every Thursday night after I'd go home, eat, and I'd go back. I'd make a circle with the chairs. I'd pass out a Bible, and we would do Bible study. And they asked me to come back about 2 months ago. They said, it's not the same, and it's been years. Like I said, they said, would you come back and talk to the men? So I went back and I spoke to the men, and I brought a man with me that was in the shelter, that me and him just became friends, and we've been friends ever since. And he lives in Woburn, and I called him, and I said, hey, come on, we'll go have dinner, then we'll do this. I want you to speak to the men too. And we did it. And when I walked into the shelter, 3 men that I helped get clean and realized that they were more than what people said they were, worked there. 2 of them are case managers, and one is a shift leader. So That kind of stuff, warms my heart.
Awesome. Thank you. Val Harris, Workforce Development Manager. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for today's segment. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.